Well, I have 10 o'clock Mountain Time, 11 o'clock Central, noon Eastern. And it would appear we're ready to start the very first SCMI webinar series. And we want to welcome everybody. Excuse me, my name is Tom Reed, and I'm still clearing my throat from morning coffee. And we're pretty excited about this opportunity. SCMI was started to promote subcontracting management within publicly funded contracts. We've been operating since about 2013. We provide certification to companies and individuals in those companies. And we're very pleased to start this webinar series. We'll be doing one each month, and more about that to come. So without further ado, let's get this started. We want to welcome everybody who's here. We want to thank you for signing up. And in your right-hand bar, you should see a little spot down the bottom that says chat. And so as we go through this, if you have any questions, feel free to jot them in there, and I will do my best to respond to them. Again, my name is Tom Reed. I'm the president of the Subcontract Management Institute. I also serve as the chief problem solver for Certified Contracting Solutions. And today we want to give you a broad overview of Subcontract Management 101. The reason we selected this one was because as we've gone around and talked to people, we've discovered that there is just so many people out there who think a subcontract is exactly like a prime contract, and they even try to put all the government clauses into them, and it just causes problems. So here's our topic today. Here's our agenda, the things that we will cover. I want to, how do I do this? I'm used to GoToMeeting. This GoToWebinar process is a little bit different for me. That's all right. I think I can minimize it more good. So we're talking about the basics of subcontract management, some distinguishing differences, and we're going to talk about 5 elements of decision. And I offered this to you in a couple different contexts, and we'll talk more about it when we get to it. And then I've got a list of the future webinars here for you. Here's a brief description of why SCMI was started. When we began to help clients with subcontract management issues, they said, we want to be world-class. You remember that phrase. We use that a lot. We want to be world-class. And we said, okay. And we went out into the world and we said, what's the standard? And we quickly discovered there was no standard. There was no body of knowledge. There was no certification program. There was really nothing that related to subcontracts in the publicly funded arena. So we sought to give our clients the knowledge, skills, competency, tools, and techniques to execute the contracts more effectively. When you realize that, and back even just a few years ago, we were saying 50%, but now it's about 60 to 80% of the prime dollars flow directly to subs in one form or another. And if any of those entities that have such a significant impact on the outcome of your project, you would think it would be natural to give them a lot more attention than they presently get. That's not the case. And so what we want to do is make sure that we've got all the people involved, all the project managers, everybody properly focused. And through that process, we developed a certification program. And right now we are offering it to companies that can field 30 or more candidates for a certification process. Here's the value proposition that we offer. There's no one doing what SCMI is doing. There's no one else providing the certification. And I should mention, SCMI was formed as a 501c3 organization. It was intentionally formed as a nonprofit entity whereby it could have the credibility to have a standard and maintain it without a lot of commercial influences on it. We established the global standard for subcontract management. This process reduces your performance risk, and we find our clients that have come through SCMI training are seeing significant returns through the more efficient and effective use of their subcontractors. So what are the basics of subcontract management? Well, it's always good to start with the definition of your terms. And so if you dig through, and we're going to use the U.S. federal government as the baseline here, because the majority of the people who have signed up, the majority of our clients deal in the U.S. government environment. We have variations to our program that deal with international and in some cases state and local when we've been requested to help there as well. But you'll see the FAR references here as we focus on the federal government. And a subcontract means any agreement. Could be a handshake. That doesn't necessarily follow all the rules of contract formation for many entities, but it can be a handshake. And the thing to keep in mind is that in a subcontract environment, all subcontracts are commercial agreements. They're not government contracts. And the importance of this is, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, that you have a different body of law, different rules for formation. There's just any number of variations that when you shift from a government contract environment to a commercial contract environment, the differences that begin to come up. And this is what we are finding that many people don't quite get. So a subcontract, by this definition, means that any subcontractor at any tier, you'll see it says government, prime, or subcontractor, calls for supplies or services for performance of a contract. Well, what about your overhead? What about the incidentals? What about those types of things? Well, you might refer to those as subcontracts, but in this context, we're only talking about those that support the prime contract objectives. We also see that subcontract means any contract that is defined in subpart 2.1, and that's where contract is defined. And it's entered into by a subcontractor to furnish supplies or services again. But it includes, even though it's not limited to, purchase orders and changes and mods to purchase orders. In other words, the size or document behind the agreement really isn't important. It is still a subcontract and falls under these rules. And then we define subcontractor at a FAR 44-101 as any supplier, distributor, vendor, or firm that provides the supplies or services for the prime contractor or another subcontractor. So the other thing that happens with subcontract administration is your subcontractors have subcontractors. And very often, they're not managing their subcontractors any better than you're managing yours. Perhaps worse, perhaps better. And so we want to make sure you get this total linkage of all the tiers in mind. Because a screw up by a sub of a sub of a sub of a sub of a sub can have a serious impact on your program. And if you're not paying attention to that, and you are not forcing your subs to apply the same level of discipline to their subs, you have introduced unnecessary risk into your program. And so it's very important to understand that this is the entire group of subcontractors that are part of the team. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this chart. This chart tells more than what we want to cover today. We use it in a variety of different contexts. But the key is that by managing your subcontractors better, you will improve your profitability. You will improve your bottom line. And in the process of doing that, you will have greater opportunities to pursue other business interests. If you look at the 5 project management process groups in the lower left-hand corner, we bring a lot of project management disciplines into this because they're very important. If you're not familiar with the PMI, Project Management Institute, it's important to note that they define a project as an activity that has a beginning, it has an end, and it has a unique output. And you roll all that together and you compare it to any contract, and guess what? Every contract is a project. So it makes sense to apply those disciplines to it. The business growth continuum shows you the various activities that go on in an effort to grow your business. And then up at the top of that, you see where we have plan. We always start with plan. My goodness, the things we do with clients who don't plan. Oh, my goodness. Plan, 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 plan. You identify, you pursue, you bid, you submit, and you perform. And that's the life cycle of any contract. So let's start by talking about some of the fundamental differences between prime and subcontract management. And the first area that we want to cover is the body of law that applies. Now, why is that important? The federal common law is what drives the FAR, and the FAR, of course, comes from statutes, come from Congress, Congress empowered by the Constitution. You can trace all of the activities in federal acquisition directly back to the Constitution. Now, some of that's through interpretation by the Supreme Court, but the point is still, it is the Constitution, a government of limited powers delineated in the Constitution, and around that grew a body of law, and that's the federal common law as we know it. So when you enter into a government prime contract, you have to follow those rules. What's included in those rules? Well, when does a contract become a contract? In the federal government arena, it is not a contract until the contracting officer, and that's a properly warranted contracting officer with full authority for the scope of the contract, the price or type or whatever, signs the contract. That's when the contract comes into being. All of the laws and rules, the rules of ethics, Procurement Integrity Act, you go down this lengthy list of federal laws that control how a prime contract is entered into and how it's administered. We have, of course, the Contracts Disputes Act, which allows the contractor, the prime contractor, to take any dispute to a Board of Contract Appeals or to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. And that's not something that's given to the subs. Now you're going to say, oh yeah, but they can give them the right to it. Yeah, there are some exceptions to the way that works, but practically speaking, those aren't very viable. The prime contract relationship with the government is under the federal common law and everything that goes with that. Now let's skip down to a subcontract. With a subcontract, these are governed by, again in the United States, the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, if you're not familiar with the Uniform Commercial Code, you should be. And it's a fascinating set of rules. It was put out by the Practicing Law Institute. And it changes from time to time. There have been various iterations of the UCC. And each state, as they adopt it, has the option to change it again within certain parameters. And this is why, even though it carries the moniker Uniform Commercial Code, and for the most part it is fairly uniform, the fact remains that depending on what version the state adopted and what changes the state made, all 50 states have slightly different rules about how the Uniform Commercial Code is actually implemented and how it's used. Excuse me. Talking so much, I'm getting a dry throat. So, Uniform Commercial Code is that body of law governed by the states. And when you enter into a subcontract, it is the body of law based on the selected state. And if none is selected, it's where the parties exist or are conducting business. You have a variation of types as we go through the normal process of analyzing a UCC-based contract. So, we've got two bodies of law already. And one of the outcomes of this is rather interesting because could a prime contractor have a claim against the government and take it through the proper appeal process and lose? And the answer is clearly yes, that could happen. Could a subcontractor with the identical claim on the identical contract sue the prime contractor in state court under the UCC? The answer is yes. But the prime contractor who sued the government and lost is now being sued by a subcontractor. Does that mean the prime contractor automatically wins because the claim was already decided at the government level? No, the prime contractor can get squeezed. They can lose before the government and they can lose before the subcontractor because two different bodies of law apply. And this is one reason why it's so important to understand what body of law you've made applicable to your subcontracts. Some contractors, the major contractors, typically are pretty good about that, and they specify it must be the law of Virginia or California or New York, and they make that very clear. But some contractors have gotten caught because, you see, there's a third body of law out there that can apply. And this is the last bullet there, the UN Convention for the International Sale of Goods. The UN Convention allows signatory countries to facilitate business among themselves. The UN Convention lays out a variety of rules, and it is automatically applicable whenever you have a company from country A that is a signatory doing business with company B in country B that is a signatory, then the UN Convention kicks in. One of the things about the UN Convention, though, is that the parties can say, wait a minute, we don't want that body of law to apply. So we're going to put in our contract that the UN Convention is specifically disclaimed. We're not going to follow that. And if you look at your standard form contracts, those of you in the larger companies, you will see over the past few years, they've finally started putting into their body of law or controlling law clauses that the UN Convention does not apply. Because if you don't do that, you can get trapped. And here's how. Let's say you enter into a contract with a company from France. And you write up a beautiful little contract, and the contract says exactly what the parties are going to do and how much you're going to pay, and everybody's happy. And you say in there, the law of New York shall apply. And you say, well, we got it nailed because we got the law of New York, and that's a big commercial center, good body of law, everybody's comfortable, everybody's happy. A dispute arises, and the French company sues you and claims that the UN Convention applies. And you say, oh, no, 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 we said New York law applies. And they said, yes, but let's look at New York. New York is a state within the United States. The United States is a signatory to the UN Convention. Therefore, a treaty like the Convention by the Constitution takes precedence. And in fact, New York law will say, if no other body of law applies, then here are the rules. But by operation of law, not by agreement of the parties, by operation of law, the UN Convention is now the applicable law in that contract. And it would have been very simple to fix it to say the laws of the state of New York apply and the UN Convention is specifically disclaimed. That's why your boilerplate clauses now say that. It's a big trap for people. They get caught, and you see cases on it frequently. And it's unfortunate because it's merely a communication issue. If you know this, you disclaim it. On the other hand, the UN Convention is designed to facilitate commerce, much as the UCC is. And there are times when you may actually want that body of law to apply. Obviously, check with your lawyers, follow the company policy on that. But when we're talking subcontracts, we have seen any number of cases where the UN Convention has stuck its nose in and really messed up the parties. I want to talk a little bit about make or buy programs. When you think about the government doing a make or buy, there was a point in time, and some of us remember this and some of us weren't born yet, where the government pretty much did everything. They ran their own shops, their own production facilities, they had their own smelters, they molded things, they built things. The government did everything, and typically contractors came in to work in government facilities. If you, for example, you're familiar with the Michoud plant in just outside of New Orleans, that used to make tank engines when it was built years and years ago. It then made the parts of the Apollo rocket, the Saturn V rockets, and more recently was used to make the external tanks on the shuttle. And so here is a government production facility operated by contractors. And that used to be the norm. It's pretty much the exception these days. And so the government doesn't make as much as it used to, but it does have certain rules about using its own people for certain services. And particularly when you get into those especially governmental functions, those have to be done by government employees. But the government still has a make or buy system. Now contractors, on the other hand, also do a make or buy analysis, and they decide whether they can handle it internally or if they should give it to a subcontractor in an effort to get perhaps somebody more expert in that particular field, or somebody who has patents on certain of the material that is going to make the end product that much better. To start that discussion, though, I want to talk a little bit about the Small Business Subcontracting Plan because it's a big piece of this. How so? Well, the Small Business Subcontracting Plan is a method by which the government makes sure that the prime contractor will adhere to the socioeconomic policies as found in FAR, which is a reflection of what's found in law. And so through this plan, goals are established for the prime contractor to award a certain percentage of contracts, dollars under the contracts, to veteran-owned business, disabled veteran-owned business, women-owned business, other small businesses, 8A businesses, hub zone business. There's all these preferences that go into that. And the reason this becomes important when we start talking about the make or buy decision, the contractor, the prime contractor may say, hey, we can do this. We know how to do it. We have the capability of doing this in-house. But this subcontracting plan has been imposed on us. We now have to go help another contractor do something we could probably do ourselves. And it begins to affect the make or buy process. Now, of course, the subcontracting plan is only required from large businesses over certain dollar value contracts. And there's an interesting thing in the law and in the regulations. It says when subcontracting opportunities exist. So arguably, if a prime contractor could do 100% all by themselves, they should be permitted to do so. Typically, however, given the pressures of the socioeconomic programs, they are sometimes required to sub out work that they would have preferred to do inside. What does this do? Well, it increases their cost. As long as it's not unreasonable, that's okay. And it forces them to mentor, in some respect, this other company to help them grow, to help them develop their business. And it's all part of the socioeconomic outreach. This does, however, introduce risk. And if you're not considering these types of risks when you're following your small business subcontracting plan, you're actually not serving the government's interests. But we see this problem frequently. Ideally, what you want to do is focus on what each company does best. And very often in large companies, they don't do everything the best. They may do it well, they may do it a little bit, not the best. And for competitive purposes, you want to bring this team together. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where you end up with 60 to 80% of your dollars going out to subs. The last bullet here talks about the mentor-protege opportunities, and there are many of those. Again, they are promoted strongly through the socioeconomic programs. SBA has one, DOD has one, several other agencies have mentor-protege or mentor-protege-like opportunities. And this, too, helps you with your socioeconomic goals, but it also helps you develop other companies to become expert in a particular field. And if that's a field you're going to need, then by all means, you want to help them be the best they can be so they can provide you with the best goods and services that are possible. So don't ignore that. And I note, too, that under mentor-protege opportunities, the mentor company has the ability to own a portion of the protege company under most programs. They furthermore can have a percentage of the work that's being done. Even though they're sponsoring the protege, they can also take a portion of that work. And so even though you're helping the protege, in some cases, the way the arrangements are structured, the mentor actually still controls the bulk of the funds, the bulk of the cash flow. But the protege is learning. The protege is growing. And but for the mentor's assistance, protege wouldn't be in the program at all. So these are good programs. You should look into them and think about it. But it does create a different type of arrangement as between the prime and the sub when you introduce a mentor-protege arrangement. So how does this make or buy decision process actually work? Well, in the private sector, sometimes you have customer desires. Now, this is a little bit touchy area for some. There have been conversations, nobody will admit to them, where a government person will come to the prime contractor and say, you know, company ABC over there is really good company, and you know, you really should be doing business with them. Now, this carries no weight, it has no merit, it's not even ethical for the most part, but it happens. The government won't want to do this, but I caution primes in this respect. If you ever get those little whispers, the FAR actually allows the government to designate a subcontractor for you. There's just one thing they have to do. They have to do a full-up determination and findings, a justification for sole source acquisition, even at the sub-level. And they have to give that to you. But we all know how it really works. The whispers are heard. The prime goes off and contracts with the small business. And business and technically may not be the best decision. I'm still learning how to use this new system we've got here, so I want to make sure that I do this right. In the private sector, you also have the marketing and advertising aspect of this. How do you find these people? How do you do the outreach? How do you find the subs that are best in their field? And this issue of matching supply to demand. The prime may decide to do some of the work in-house and farm some of it out. But then when business gets slow, what do? They bring more of it in-house. So a sub who was listed as part of the competition and part of the evaluation and was extra points on the evaluation suddenly gets squeezed out. Make or buy decision can shift over time. In some cases, you have distribution networks. And in other cases, you have to look at the competitive stance within that commercial marketplace. Is this something the prime contractor wants to do, or is it where they want to go? And it's not unheard of at all where a small company is mentored, maybe formally, maybe not, but assisted and given a lot of work by a prime contractor who ultimately buys them and brings them in-house. And so all of these dynamics that are apparent in the market are going on while the make or buy decision, as I said, can be quite a fluid decision, continues to go on. When you look at the public sector, though, things become a little different because you've got all the social policy overriding this. Then you have the issue of cost pass-through. And GAO and DCA and other entities that look at your costs are very concerned about the pyramiding of profit and how you will tack on a subcontract management fee or material handling fee, or it comes by a lot of different names, to work that the government could have gotten directly. Now, on the one hand, you say, well, if the government wanted to get it directly and provide it as GFP, or government provided services. Then you cut out that middleman and the fee that goes with it. But very often the government wants it both ways. They don't want to pay that fee, but they want the prime to manage the subcontracts. Again, you have the issue of the competitive stance within the public marketplace for these contractors. But most importantly, in the public sector, is the issue of full contract compliance. And there are so many pitfalls here. We're going to have some other webinars through the year that talk about some of these points, but some of them include the idea that you have a set of flow downs that have to go to the sub. This is handled very poorly by most primes, and we'll emphasize over and over that clauses cost. And you put all these clauses in, contractors will do it. Think of yourself as the prime, and the government says, hey, we're going to add a clause. You say, okay, great, and here's the cost. And when they add a clause, you get additional cost, and your subs are entitled to the same thing. So you don't stack all of that in there. But you also have the issue, for example, of property rights. For example, if you contract with a sub and the data you request from the sub is less than what the prime contract requires, you're going to have to go back to that sub and buy more rights. And trust me, they ain't going to be cheap at that point in time. And so you have to look at the full contract compliance, everything the prime has to do, and make sure that they have properly flowed to the subs all the different issues, all the different data, all the different rights, the inspection rights and the audit rights, and you go down that whole list of rights that are included there. And in fact, you need to make sure you've got full contract compliance. So the make or buy decision you think is simple. And I'm going to say something that I'm going to irritate some people on the line, and in part I don't care because you need to hear it. Ask around, if you're not familiar with this, but ask around who picks your subcontractors. And the prime contract people are probably going to tell you, oh, well, we run a fully competitive environment, it's full and open competition, and we find the best source for the government, and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I get that. In your dreams, in most cases. Because in many, many organizations, the subs are selected by the marketing department. Oh, we need this teammate. We need to bring this guy in. We need this one to win this contract. And whether it's your business development or your marketing, they have large sway in who gets picked. The other part of that is the manufacturing group. In fact, many subcontract organizations are organizationally housed in the manufacturing department. In fact, next month's webinar, another free webinar we're doing for you, is going to address that particular issue of where does subcontracts even belong in an organization. But the point is that if marketing hasn't picked this up, very often manufacturing will, because they're trusted suppliers. They're people we've done business with for years. And the prime contracts people are going to come and say, oh, no, we got this subcontract management plan. We've got to award all this work to small businesses. Manufacturing is not going to be happy because they're going to have to be forced to work with someone they're not familiar with, maybe someone who's not quite as adept, doesn't have quite the same experience. And that's the point that we need to make here. Your make or buy decision is critical when you're putting the right team together. You need to make sure that the right people in the right organizations are making the right decisions that are going to maximize your effective and efficient performance of the contract and have a positive impact on your bottom line. So big differences in how the make or buy decision is managed as between a prime and a sub. Now let's talk a little bit about the source selection process. When you put your team together, your subcontracting team, you are trying to create a high-performance team, not just a bunch of lackadaisical, send me some piece parts and let's see if they all fit when we're done. You have to make the best possible selection. You have to do some level of background check. Very often this is a Dun & Bradstreet check. You check credit, you check a couple of things. In my experience, the background check done on subs is typically very cursory and often inadequate. The next thing you have to think about is your CPSR, your Contractors Purchasing System Review. If you're a prime contractor and you are going to be audited in how you deal with your subs, you need to make sure that you have full and open competition and all the things the prime contracts people were saying. Because if not, your system will not be approved. If your system is not approved, you have to play Mother May I. You have to go to the government for every significant contract and say, may I award this contract? And with no slight intended towards our federal government employees who do this, in many, many cases, the contracting officer who must approve a placement of a subcontract, give consent, is not really well versed in commercial contracting. They may have spent their entire career in prime contracting working for the government. And so there are many, many risks and missteps that can be made if you aren't proactive in picking your own high-performance team. And then the last bullet here is like any team development. How do you bring members onto the team? Well, if you're working in your company and you're trying to get somebody to help out with a new project and you're picking people from different departments, you need to make sure that they're brought on board and fully familiarized with the project. In fact, they understand the work breakdown structure. They understand globally the work breakdown structure, and they understand what portion of that is theirs. They understand how the interface controls are going to work, how what they make must fit into something somebody else is making. And even in the area of classification, and there's big interest in this right now, sometimes you want to segregate or compartmentalize different things because too much knowledge in one party can give rise to security breaches. And so if somebody's making widget A and they have no idea what it does or how it really works, and somebody else is making widget B and they have no idea how it works, when you bring widget A to widget B, you suddenly have something that may be very highly classified. And so selecting your contractors with those kinds of considerations in mind can often be very helpful in the process. But bottom line, you've got a variety of interests as a prime contractor to weigh in order to figure out how to pick your subs. Sometimes you do it strictly because it's in the small business subcontracting plan. Other times you do it because of particular skills or techniques. Sometimes you do it because you let marketing or manufacturing tell you who you're going to contract with, and the subcontracts people are then simply paper pushers backing up the agreement with a piece of paper that's already been made. And so there are a variety of ways to do this. There are right ways and wrong ways to do it. And again, this is going to be the subject of a future webinar. But I wanted to raise it to you here in terms of Subcontracting 101 because if you pick the wrong teammate, and any of you that have been through this know exactly what I'm saying, it's a marriage. And marriages rarely end amicably. And if you have to end that marriage, stand by for a fight. It's going to be a problem. It's going to be a cost of which you can't pass on to the government. And so pick the right party in the first instance and avoid all of this on the back end. I wanted to see if we had any questions that I make sure I answer. And it gives me a little teeny tiny box to scroll through here. Do you know if DoD's CPAR process still precludes access to subcontractors? To the best of my knowledge right now, the answer is yes. I know they've been working on it and trying to fix it. This is where you get the past performance data. And in my experience, you don't rely on that anyway. It's a public system. There are restrictions in it in terms of who can access it, which is what the question really deals with. But also in terms of the quality of the data that goes into it sometimes, we have found the best practice to be that you check references yourself. You find out who they've done work for. You get past performance data directly from people who have used their services. Now, who are they going to give you as references? Only the ones they've had superlative work relationships. But a little bit of background checking can go a long ways towards ferreting some of that out. Okay, now we want to move to here. I told you I was going to talk about flow downs, and here's where we bring it in. Clauses cost. They cost when the prime adds them, the government adds them to the prime, but they cost when the prime adds them to the sub. I had a client once who asked me to come in and help them with a particularly large negotiation. It had to do with some shipboard components that they manufactured for a major shipbuilding contractor. And that may limit it down to guessing who this is. But that aside, they brought in a team of people to conduct the negotiations. And the technical people went off and they did their thing. And the contracts people sat around a table. And the prime contractor said to the sub, well, you know, sometimes you're the prime, sometimes we're the prime. We both play the sub. These are standard clauses. This is all boilerplate. All these clauses come out of FAR. They're out of the prime contract. So there's really nothing to negotiate on clauses, so let's just move on. Well, they had brought me in and had me review the contract that had been sent by the prime to the sub, the proposed contract. And it was pretty clear that they had gone to their little file folder or mailbox slot office operation, and they picked one sheet of paper out of every single mailbox hole, stapled them together, and said, voila, we have a contract. So we had done a compliance matrix on this abomination they had handed us. And when they gave us that little lecture about, well, they're all standard clauses and it's all boilerplate and we all comply with them and blah, 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 I said, okay, I get that. I understand. And what you're saying is pretty much how practice works. But I do have one question. You know, we looked at all the clauses you put in here, and are you aware that you included 7 different inspection and acceptance clauses? Oh, no, we wouldn't do that. I said, yeah, you did. And because we had constructed a compliance matrix, we were able to show them. Here were the 7 clauses. We said, look, we got no problem with the clauses, but you got to tell us which one applies to which deliverable, because there were goods and there were services and there was a variety of work being done, but they just slapped 7 INA clauses into the contract. That's ridiculous. It's not only ridiculous, it is incredibly sloppy contract drafting. How do you even manage a contract like that? But somewhere along the line, they'd been taught you pick one out of each of the mail slots, you staple them together, and there you go. Those are your clauses. This is terrible contract drafting and terrible contract management, and I guarantee you it will lead to disputes. The funniest part of that meeting was when we pointed out the 7 INA clauses to the prime, we handed them our matrix, and they started flipping through our matrix and studying it. And finally, they looked up and they said, "Can we have this?" We said, "Sure. It's going to make you write better contracts. You can take any of the tools you need." You don't slap every clause in there. You tailor the clauses appropriately, and you don't stick prime contract clauses directly into a sub, because under the prime contract, the government has rights that the prime contractor will never have. There are things a contracting officer can decide that the prime contractor cannot. There are things that the prime contractor will have a right to do, such as an appeal to a board of contract appeals, that a subcontractor will never have. And we see so many subcontracts where the government clauses have simply been cut and pasted into a subcontract document, didn't even attempt to change the references to the parties. You've created a wholly ambiguous contract, and that is just such sloppy drafting. Here's another example. If you read FAR carefully, it says, here is the definition of a commercial item. That's FAR Part 2. Goes in a lot of detail. It's very long. It's been added to a few times, so there's a few things that appear to be out of order, but it's all there. And it says that services, in fact, can also be part of a commercial item. Don't let that bother you. It's the way the government writes sometimes. But the most important part of that says, once a good or service has been declared a commercial item, then the government shall, mandatory, use the commercial item processes. That's FAR Part 12. Too many contracting officers think they have a lot of latitude there. And if you look at the commercial item processes carefully, when it first started, when FASA first set it all up, it was designed to have 4 clauses that would have to be flowed to subcontractors under commercial items. Just 4. And part of the idea was to bring people who wouldn't normally do business with the government into the government, because one of their big complaints was, oh, I got too many clauses to comply with. Okay, we get that. So government said 4. We're just going to limit it to 4. If you look at FAR 52212-4, I believe it is, today, you might be fascinated to discover that there are now 20 clauses that must be sent into a commercial item simplified acquisition contract. From 4 to 20 in just a couple decades. Now, granted, some of those have come out of executive orders. One of them is under an injunction by a court in Texas, and some of the others may be undone by future executive orders. But as it stands today, 20 clauses in the simplified commercial item contract these days. That's not simplifying things. We as an industry, we as a profession are not paying enough attention to how these subcontract flowdowns work. There's a lot of thought, a lot of theory, a lot of people talking about it. It is a time-consuming, laborious, detail-oriented process to get it right. And the minute you get it right, one of the rules changes, and you have to go back and revisit it. I often have companies come to me and say, hey, can you teach me to do business with the government? And it's like, well, yeah, that's what I do on my business, and we're happy to help you. We have an ebook on our site. You can go learn all the processes. Yeah, we can do that. We just have one question before we start. Why would you want to do that? So often, the complexities of the government just overwhelm companies, and they just don't want to go through with it. We get that. It can be burdensome. The margins can be lower. There can be all kinds of issues to not do business as a government prime contractor. But keep in mind, the government buys everything. The government buys lots of everything. Government pays fairly promptly in almost all cases, and they have a very structured disputes process that doesn't waste a lot of time in court. And so there's always good reasons to do business with the government. But consider it. There are issues, pro and con, when you're trying to do that. Let me see. I had another question here. Where can I find more on disclaiming UN convention in subcontracts? Well, there's a couple of secondary resources out there you can appeal to. The best book on it is actually one that's put out by the American Bar Association, and if your lawyers are members of that, they can get a discount in the process of doing that. but there's a ABA book on the UN Convention. But if you're just looking to disclaim it, it's really simple. You simply put in and it's usually in the governing law clause, where you say the parties specifically disclaim the applicability of the UN Convention for the international sale of goods, period. One sentence, you're done. So just disclaiming it is simple. But keep in mind, if you have a choice of bodies of law, you don't just want to throw one out the window right away. It might be your best bet, but I leave that to the lawyers in your organization to guide you on that. But if you're just looking for more information, I recommend the ABA book. Where can I find a good example of a compliance matrix? Excellent question. And the reason it's excellent is because I wrote an article about that, and you can find the article and a sample in January 2004 Contract Management Magazine. It's amazing what your mind retains sometimes, but I'm pretty sure it was January 2004. You can, if you're an NCMA member, you can go look in their archives. If you're not an NCMA member, there's another easy access to it. I maintain all of my articles on my website. They're not part of the SCMI website, although a couple of them are there. But all of my articles are on certifiedksolutions.com. And under news and information, we have the published articles, and creating a contract compliance matrix is one of those articles, and it's in there. If that doesn't work for you, then simply go to asktomreed.com, asktomreid.com, and you'll find a little form there, and kick me a question. Just say, where can I find it, or send me a copy of the article, or do you have a better sample, or whatever. And I do have some bigger samples that I could provide you. But asktomreed.com. And by the way, that offer extends well beyond this webinar, or any other future webinars that you attend with SCMI, whether or not I'm presenting on them. I invite questions anytime on government contract topics. And by the way, I get questions on a lot of weird topics at that site, but they can be discarded. But I do my best to answer the questions that come through on asktomreed.com. So if the article isn't sufficient, reach out to me. We'll help you out. This person tells me they are an NCMA member, and that's good. And in fact, SCMI will be presenting, and we have a booth at the Subcon event later this week. If any of you are going to be there, look me up. SCMI will have its booth, and we're doing a presentation on the strategic selection of subcontractors. It applies strategic and critical thinking to that topic I was discussing earlier, to how do you pick your subs, and we go into it in a little more detail. My co-presenter there will be Len Vincent, who is the vice chair of SCMI, and some of you may know Len. Excellent presenter, excellent speaker. So I'm looking forward to that conference at the end of this week, the Subcon event, for those of you that will be there. Let me see. I think we're doing okay on time, but we need to move along. So when you talk about the benefits of effective subcontracting, and I give you a list here. I'm not going to read the chart to you, but there are benefits to the prime and to the sub, because the sub is trying to learn and grow, and the prime is trying to get all of the many requirements of the prime contract fulfilled. They also are required to promote many government initiatives like socioeconomic programs. They can have leader-follower things with supply base to make sure we maintain a broad enough supply base. And everybody wants to grow and be able to get bigger and bigger contracts. The sub, when they take that role, if they do it right, and they don't all do it right, but they will learn how to be a prime contractor. But more importantly, the disciplines imposed on them by the prime, which are imposed on them by the government, are going to help them fix their internal processes, and they will improve them. We recently got called in to do a 2-hour ethics presentation. This company had decided to cut some corners and misrepresent some things to the government, and they were about to get themselves debarred. They isolated the individuals. They entered into a settlement agreement, so the company didn't get debarred, but they had to do ethics training. And so this company really, and it was 100% of their employees that had to be trained under the settlement agreement, they had never really taught their people anything about the ethics training. And once we gave the training to them, they said, wow, this is going to help us in our commercial work too. And it's like, yeah, ethical business dealings tend to do that. But until you focus on it and fix the things, you don't necessarily realize that. So big benefits to the subcontractor if it's all done right. And keep in mind that many of your subs and first-time primes, their world, and I'm going back to the earlier chart, their world is UCC. Their world is Uniform Commercial Code. When the TV repairman comes to your house, he has a little form on the front that has your name and address and what work you need done, and all this fine print on the back. And that's a typical UCC-based agreement. It is a contract, and you are signing a contract with terms and conditions you never read. Nobody ever reads them. Kind of like software license agreements. You know, you just scroll to the bottom and click I agree. You have no idea what you've given away. But the government process is much more formal and much more structured. And new subs begin to understand that this body of law of the UCC that they're used to, it ain't the rules of the game anymore. It's now the formal system. Now, where we see the biggest issues with subcontractors is this idea of quality assurance and making sure you have proper systems integration. Too many primes don't manage their own business as well as they should. Every project should have a WBS, a work breakdown structure. And if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to look up some information that's available through PMI, Project Management Institute. And what a WBS is a deconstruction of every task that has to be done for every deliverable under the contract. We've got a new leadership book coming out later this year, which uses this tool to deconstruct leadership. And if we can deconstruct leadership, you can deconstruct the project you're working on. But once you have a good WBS at the prime level, it's very easy to then isolate those elements that go to the various subs. And if you're a visual learner, as I am, and many of you probably are too, a good graphic of your WBS tagged with who the subcontractors are that are doing the different pieces will help you tremendously in managing the project and reducing risk. The other piece of that has to do with interface control. And the story I like to tell goes back to my days at NASA on the external tank. And there's a quick disconnect valve that allows the hydrogen and oxygen to flow out of the external tank into the engines on the shuttle. Of course, when that external tank is blown away from the shuttle, those valves have to quickly disconnect. They were made by Parker Hannifin. And half of it attached to the shuttle and half of it attached to the external tank. And the constant question, and Parker Hannifin got whipsawed on this, was, well, who owns that then? Does the external tank manufacturer at the time, Martin Marietta, or does the shuttle manufacturer at the time, Rockwell Downey? And they didn't have a proper interface control over the contract management aspects of that. The good news was that since Parker Hannifin made both halves of it, we knew that fit, but then it had to also fit to the shuttle and to the external tank respectively. So this interface control was ignored, and it's not until the things are done and they bring them into the shop to nail them all together. Yes, nailing here is a euphemism. But nail it all together and discover, oh gee, slot A doesn't fit into tab B. And suddenly you feel like you're at an IKEA shop trying to put furniture together and not some piece of aerospace hardware. Good use of WBS, good interface control, and proper use of IPTs. What does that stand for? Integrated Project, and sometimes Product Teams. This is where you actually bring the sub into the family. You work as a team, cooperatively. You kind of knock down that arm's length. You still have that in the business side of things. But in terms of getting the job done, you work as an integrated project team. Furthermore, you develop, prime contractors, a QASP, Quality Assurance Surveillance Plan. It's sad to see that the government in some cases is doing a much better job of this with their primes than the primes are doing with their subs. Quality control is the contractor's responsibility. In other words, the prime has to control what they do in quality on their output, as the subs have to control the quality of their output. At the higher level, your job is quality assurance, making sure that, in fact, the lower tier companies are doing what they're supposed to do, and this is a QASP. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but if you're not familiar with the term, you can look it up in FAR. You can also find some good resources online that will explain that to you. But quality control and surveillance of the quality systems is critically important to program success. And I mentioned this earlier, but I stuck the bullet here as well. Making sure that in this scoping with this WBS, that the prime or higher level sub gets from its sub what it was promised to the higher level. And data rights is one of these areas that's been a particularly problematic area lately. And so I encourage you to make sure you've got all of this scoped, you've got the quality under control, you bring them in as part of the team, and you work as a team for the overall success of the program. Got another quick question over here. Can you please talk a little bit about the difference between a subcontractor, subgrantee versus a consultant? Thank you. If you enter into an agreement, going back to that very first definition on the earlier charts, a consultant who is contributing to the final product is a subcontractor. The form of the agreement, the nature of the work, the nature of the services is no different. Now, you blended in your question subcontractor slash subgrantee. Now, FAR does not apply to grants. I want to emphasize that. FAR is an acquisition regulation. Grants are handled through what's known as the super circular, a big new circular that came out from OMB in 2015. In fact, it was effective in 2015. And grants are different, and you have to go to grants handbooks to understand that aspect of it. A lot of similarities, but I just want to emphasize that the governing rules, again, the body of law for grants, is different than it is for subcontractors. Now, back to the consultant. If, on the other hand, you bring a consultant in and you say, we're trying to do business with the government, we have no idea what we're doing, can you teach us? Then the consultant in that case is not really supporting a project, and they're not a subcontractor in that sense. They are, however, part of your supplier base because, most likely, they are going to be charged into your overhead pools. And to the degree you draw from your overhead pools the various subcontractors who support the various corporate functions that are going on, then it's still a subcontract in that sense. You don't necessarily have all of the it gets complicated, but the point is that they're still part of the subcontractor team in one way or another. And I'll give you a good example. I was facilitating, and in fact was named in the contract, key personnel and subject matter expert, when HHS was redoing their FAR supplement. We did that, I think we wrapped up in 2015. And so I was a subcontractor to the prime, who was an 8A contractor. And we had an agreement, and it was just like any other subcontract that was required to be in place amongst the prime and its subs. I was classified as a consultant, as the SME, but still subcontract and still part of the whole plan, and the government got to audit my invoices and all those good things. So no real difference, except when you get into the overhead side of things, and some of the costing can be a little different in terms of how that works. I hope that helps. Let me see. We're getting close to wrapping up here, so let me run through a couple of things. Just want to make this comment that good systems help good people perform well. No question. You should have good systems. Good processes also help good people perform well. And you should have good processes and constantly update them to the current best practices. But as the third bullet points out, a lack of good people, it guarantees nothing performs well. And you got to get the right people in place. And this is why SCMI, part of our certification program, emphasizes this role of leadership. How do you find the right leaders? These are people with character, with competence. They have compassion. They know how to deal with people and work on teams. They're communicators. They keep people informed, and they're committed. This is the 5 categories of elements that will show up in the leadership, Sustained Leadership WBS is what it's called, book that we have coming out later. But the key thing is that the processes and systems, yeah, they're important and they can hurt you, but without good people, nothing gets done. And this is, again, why we emphasize the certification. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I throw this chart in just as kind of a reference point. And again, we have a future webinar that will talk more about this. The type of paper that the agreement is written on isn't very important. It is, in fact, not determinative of much of anything. All of these can be arrangements by which you enter into a subcontract with somebody. And very interesting case, and I didn't put the reference in here because I just found it recently. But the Board of Contract Appeals has said, look, you make a deal with a sub, you can't go jilting them at the altar. You can't leave them at the altar. You got to be, and they use that phrasing. If you've made the commitment to them, and you try to classify it as an agreement to agree, which is not a contract in the classic legal definition, you still got to be fair. You still got to do it right. But it may be a teaming agreement. It may be a partnering. It may be a joint venture. I mentioned the mentor-protege earlier. It may exist simply as a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, as we say there, or licensing. And the point is that your arrangement with subs can take a lot of shapes, a lot of forms. There can be a lot of different things, and there's no gospel about any of this. Work with your legal team. Now, in the last couple of minutes we have, I want to run through very quickly a 5-point decision process that we'd like you to consider. And by the way, these 5 points, if you're ever doing a presentation for your bosses, these 5 points are, in my view, excellent ways to walk people through a decision process. And the first thing you give them is their expected results. And we want to encourage you to think about certification. Okay, it's a free seminar, guys, so you're going to sit for the sales pitch, I'm sure, but it's important. And again, we're a 501c3 because we're passionate about the importance of this and the importance of certification. And so it demonstrates your commitment to the quality, and it does count when the government's looking at you relative to how well you manage the 60 to 80% that's going to subs. You can attract the best talent when you've got certification in your organization, and they will perform better. The well-trained workforce, and that's the key bullet, when they're working within that defined and approved processes with the right tools, will greatly enhance your success in passing CPSR reviews, and you will be viewed as a preferred partner among the subcontracting community. What that means is when you issue a solicitation of any sort as a prime to the pool of subcontractors, more subs are going to want to do business with you because you've demonstrated you know how to treat them right. And I'm not saying give them more money. It's not always money. There's another article on my website about what motivates contractors. It's worth reading as well. And what are the resources? Well, typically now we're working with larger companies. We're setting up some regional things in the future for smaller companies. But the larger companies, you can get 30 people certified for less than $3,000 a person. And this includes the entire certification program. Our training platform includes every type of learning, from self-study to web research to reviewing internal policies and procedures. We've got conferences, and the webinars you see here is what we're doing right now. And we also have communities of practice being set up within the SCMI website to work with that. The next thing you want to pitch to your bosses to make a decision is testimonials. We're very proud of that last one. The student feedback said 29 of 29. They had one person drop out from the 30. Would recommend the course. And the boss was the one who made the top one about a class that we did from the 4-day session. And so, proven steps. If you want to seek certification for your company, reach out to us. We can help you. You contact your regional sales rep, get your 30 people together. We'll put an agreement together with you, and we'll start the training. And that's the step to getting certified. By the way, very important part. Part of the certification is experientially based. When you complete the training, you get a certificate of completion. 6 months later, we come back and we talk to your bosses and your peers and say, has this person truly put into place and into effect what they learned? Because if they didn't, you ain't getting certified. And so 6 months later is when you get your certification, because that experiential component in our mind is critically important to true certification. Who do you contact? We have East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast representation. If you can't jot this down real quick, I get that. Again, reach out to me, asktomreed.com. I will definitely get back to you with the right point of contact and help you out in doing that. And I think we are about there at the time. Here are the future webinars we're going to be doing next month, April 17th. Pros and cons, organizational alignment, free to all. It's the second free one that we're doing. And then this is the list of other ones that we'll do. And note at the bottom, it says, watch out for the bonus webinars. When emerging issues arise, if you're on our list, we're going to reach out to you. And by the way, you should go to the SCMI website. It's sc-m-i.org. But go to the SCMI website, get on our mailing list, and bonus webinars are very possible to emerge because we know how dynamic our field is. But this is what we've got scheduled for the rest of the year, subject to change as needs arise. The webinars are $100. It's just $100 to sign up. You'll be put into our learning management system, and whether or not you are currently certified, you will begin earning the credits necessary for certification. And we also have a package. You can do $750 for the full year and get 12 seminars, or actually, what is it? It's 10 left on this one. I forget the numbers, but the math is supposed to work out. I trust our pricing people on that. So that's kind of it. We are just a minute or two past noon. I apologize for going over, but I see that almost everybody has stuck with me, and I appreciate that very much. Here's my point of contact. You can also call our office in Washington and be routed to the right person. And I want to thank you very much for your questions, for your attention, for your participation in this. I appreciate you signing up, and hopefully you learned a few things that you will take back to your desk now, or if it's lunchtime, you'll go eat lunch and then take back to your desk. Actually put some of this to use. Put it to good use in your company, improving your subcontract management processes. And with that, I will sign off. We'll wrap up and hope to see you all back here on April 17th for a discussion on where should subcontracts organizationally be positioned. Thanks again. Tom Reed signing off, and we appreciate your attention to all of this.